Hello and welcome to Soberanía, the Mexican politics podcast. I'm your co-host, José Luis Granados Ceja, a Mexican journalist living and working here in Mexico City. I'm a staff writer and a host of the podcast over at Venezuela Analysis. And as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Kurt Hackbarth. Kurt, welcome to the show. How you doing?
Thank you very much, José Luis. My name is Kurt Hackbarth, back in Oaxaca for now, writing for Jacobin Magazine in the United States, Sentido Común here in Mexico, ready for another edition of Sovereignty. No, wait.
Did you get that?
No.
I don't
know. I got it. Ready for another edition of Soberanité. No.
No, I think you're still off the mark.
Soberanità! Soveranité!
That's the Italian coming out.
No!
Well, come on. Which one is it?
Soberanía.
There we go. Now we can start. Welcome to the show. Another episode. Mm-hmm. Episode 33. Did you think we would have made it this far when you said, hey, let's do a podcast?
No, I did not. And not this quickly.
All right. So here's our rundown for this week's episode. We got FIFA-Linked corruption claiming Emilio Jan Azcárraga. Not all the other stuff that he was up to. It's the FIFA-Linked corruption that seems to have claimed the chairman of Televisa, another hit for private media outlets here, and one of the representatives of the Mexican oligarchy. We're also going to be talking about the Querétaro State Attorney General, who is prosecuting a victim of sexual assault in a truly egregious case of how poorly justice is carried out in this country. But there is good news in the sense that there is already intervention happening at the federal level to keep this injustice from moving forward, but absolutely jaw-dropping kind of situation where the world is upside down, it feels like sometimes. Claudio X González, we all know the guy. Well, none other than Claudia Sheinbaum, la presidenta, called him a toxic Failson, really kind of ramping up the tensions with this guy. But I think it's appropriate. You know, he is a political actor, and political actors invite this kind of criticism, even if it is harsh, coming all the way from the presidency of the republic. We also have this funny story that actually hit close to home for me because some of this fake news around the new social program to bring healthcare to people who've never had access to it before is now being used as a red scare tactic. They're coming for your homes, Kurt. They're going to take away your homes. They're not giving you help at all. Watch out. And of course, good news from Mexico, and losers and haters got a couple of pieces of news for you there. We're going to make fun of one of these think tank guys who loves to collect fat salaries in exchange for shaming any government that doesn't align perfectly with Washington. All right. So on our first story, we're going to have Kurt here give us the rundown, but I'll read the headline and the lead for you. Televisa chairman taking leave amid a FIFA bribery probe. Televisa's executive chairman, Emilio Azcárraga, is taking a, quote, administrative leave, end quote, pending the results of a U.S. Department of Justice investigation into the company's dealings with FIFA soccer officials, the Mexican broadcaster said on Thursday. Azcárraga's leave will be effective immediately, Grupo Televisa said in its third quarter results, etc., etc. Televisa saying it's going to cooperate with the investigation. This is a big deal. This is not just, casual little mention it at the end of the quarterly report. This guy's been at the head of Televisa for a long time, and he's taking what they're calling an administrative leave as a result of a corruption probe led not by a politicized judiciary here in Mexico, but the DOJ over in the United States. So what does this tell us about Televisa, about FIFA? Have they not been able to clean up their act? Is this a sign of them actually trying to do something about it? As we should all remember, Mexico, US, Canada, in a joint bid, are actually hosting the next World Cup. So there's a lot to unpack here. Kurt, take it away.
Yeah, so as you said, it's a big deal. And it's such a big deal that this is actually going to be the first time since 1930 that someone from the Azcárraga family is not going to be in the directorship of Televisa. We've talked so much on this program about, how, the previous regime, was, this monolith of PRI hegemony, for 73 years, leading up to the managed democracy of the 2000s, leading to finally the clean break in 2018. A key linchpin of this was the Televisa television network. None of it could have happened without the dominance of Televisa in the Mexican public. I mean, it was a monster, and it's been a monster in so many ways in Mexican history for so long. So to see the grandson, right, Emilio Azcárraga John, have to take administrative leave, it's really a sign of the times in that one by one, right, the key figures that kept that monolith going for so long are hitting the wall, right? And this is a big one to hit the wall. What is the allegation? The allegation is that Televisa engaged in some foul play in order to get the rights to transmit, the World Cup in 4 occasions: 2018, 2022, 2026, and 2030. They're alleged to have, first of all, inflated their stock price, right? And second, to have actually directly handed out a $15 million bribe, right, to get those rights, right? As naked and as bald as that, here's your $15 million, right? As the article says there on the screen, they've already had to shell out $95 million to settle a lawsuit that was brought against them, right? But now the charges are, advancing to the point that Azcárraga felt that he needed to step aside temporarily. We'll see how long this goes, because Televisa is really suffering, right, in the stock market. And of course, it's a huge publicity and media public relations hit for them, right? Let's take a step back, though, right, and see where this all is in context, right? So Televisa is founded by the grandfather of Emilio Azcárraga, right? Talking about, back in 1930. It became the big company, not only in Mexico, but, throughout Latin America, and also, into the United States, through Univision and other things, because there was some visionariness in there, we have to admit, right? They were quick to realize the potential of transmitting broadcasting sports on television by the 1950s, when television was in its infancy. And they were also very visionary in the sense of realizing the advantage of getting a satellite up into space in order to make sure that their operations would become international, right? So got to give them credit for that, right? But it's all the more ironic because Televisa really became the beast that we know by guaranteeing the broadcast rights to the 1968 Olympics, held mere weeks after the massacre of the Tlatelolco students in Tlatelolco, right? But also 2 years later, the World Cup of 1970. Right? That's what really made Televisa Televisa. And then it's funny that, the philosophy of Televisa aligned so well with the philosophy of the PRI in those years, right? Emilio Azcárraga John's father, right? So the second in line, right? Emilio Azcárraga Milmo, known as the Tiger, El Tigre, famously said in an interview in the 90s, saying the quiet part out loud, that Mexico has a very modest and very fucked, his words, so don't ban us. Okay, don't, we have to beep this out. A very effed, so working class that's never going to stop being effed. They're always going to be effed. So the function of television was to provide, mindless entertainment for this modest effed class of Mexicans who are always going to be that way. Okay?
Perfect. Days before PR or something? Yeah. Like before they're like, hey, don't say that part. We all know it's true, but don't say it out loud.
Because it was just so bald. They had so much power. They could just, what does it matter? What does it matter? And they, their power lasted several more decades after he even said it.
Yeah.
So the idea was that, right? Entertainment to enajenar that class, right, of people. And enajenar in Spanish is to alienate. Basically, alienate yourself, create alienation, create an alienated class of people, right? Right out of political philosophy, right? This idea of alienation. So anyone who's lived in Mexico for any degree of time knows how that played out in practice. Just a steady vomit of, awful talk shows, racist, classist tropes, skewed news, right? Absolutely skewed news, right? The famous 1968 broadcast after the student massacre was, "Today was a sunny day." They led on the weather after the student massacre. And that tells you everything you need to know about these people, because that's the way it rolled, right? And of course, telenovelas, soap operas, not during the day as in the United States, but in prime time at night, to really inculcate those racist and classist values right into the prime time population, and directly for political purposes. Right? I remember very well in 2006, right? You'd have soap opera characters specifically say, I'm going to vote for Felipe Calderon. He's going to provide jobs. Amazing. I mean, right in the mouths of soap opera characters. That's how bald the whole thing was.
Yeah.
Right? So
I put here up on the screen as well, just combined with the fact that same man, the one you're talking about now, who said the quiet ballad, also said this. He said, "I'm a soldier of the
PRI.
Putting it out there, quite literally saying, no. I would say, I'm not an independent, media conglomerate head. Oh, I'm not in pursuit of truth. No, I work for the single party dictatorship that runs this country."
And that's the way it was. Before social media, you had two private networks, and we'll talk about the other one in a minute, Televisa and TV Azteca. All the newspapers were controlled. The radio was totally controlled, right? There was one left-leaning newspaper, the Jornada, starting in the 80s, which got to a very small part of the country. You think everybody gets the Jornada? No. It was Mexico City and a few other urban areas. That was it, right? So, but Televisa got everywhere because they were very smart, because of their satellites, because of their connections, It was like Coca-Cola got everywhere, Televisa got everywhere, right? So none of Mexico in the 20th century can be explained or understood without Televisa and its little mini-me, TV Azteca, which is also going through its own crisis right now, because its owner, Ricardo Salinas Pliego, let us not forget that TV Azteca was part of the whole privatization bonanza of the 80s and 90s, was a public channel called Imevisión, which became TV Azteca. Similar thing, skewed news with Salinas Pliego's lapdog, right? The television anchorman is Javier Alatorre, right? Just like, Televisa had López Dóriga, its own lapdog, the Azcárraga lapdog for years, right? And remember, as you pointed out, José Luis, TV Azteca actually was created through violence. Remember when you're saying, that's where the Chiquihuitazo happened over on that hillside, right? When they stormed Channel 40 with a bunch of guerrillas? Goons to take over the station? This is how Azteca was born, through violence. And now it's, it's ironic in two ways, right? First of all, it's ironic that Televisa is hitting the wall because of FIFA-related corruption, when Televisa became Televisa because of its broadcasting of FIFA, right? That's what made Televisa the big thing, broadcasting Olympics and FIFA. Salinas Pliego, then, for Azteca, who always says, "I'm the big businessman," whatever else, is also in trouble with U.S. investors because his company issued $219 million worth of effectively bonds. They're called notas de deuda, that he just decided not to pay. So what are you going to do about it? But this is in addition to the $3 billion he owes in back taxes in Mexico. He thought he never had to pay that because he had the judges in his pocket. And he thought he never had to pay this, the $219 million in the bonds, right? Because he had the judges in his pocket. And he was right. Mexican judges voted to let him off on that. And now the U.S. investors are pissed, and they're pissed at the Mexican justice system. And it's like, this is why they're doing the judicial reform. Do you understand it now? Do you understand it now that the U.S. investors are getting screwed like the Mexican public's gotten screwed for years? Yeah? Maybe you'll understand it when you have Salinas Pliego not paying you your money back, like he hasn't paid anybody else's money back. That's why they're doing the judicial reform. And that's why Mexico's two major television networks, right, the famous duopoly of Televisa and TV Azteca, they're all hitting the wall. And their stocks are crashing, and it's fun to watch, and I am here for it, José Luis.
The other thing I would add to that is that there's also an effect on the audience, right? We've talked about this on a different episode. I don't remember off the top of my head, but we've seen in particular, these outlets are the ones that most are suffering overall a loss of trust. This is from Latinometrics, and it's about faith in news in general, but it speaks to the broader trend that is happening here. And yeah, indeed, right? Trust by the public in private media outlets is declining because this is their legacy. This is their history. And it seems like, every other day there's a new kind of scandal or some kind of issue around these. And so I think this graph in particular isn't particularly surprising when it comes to trust in the media, particularly since the arrival of the forced transformation of Mexico, the election of López Obrador in 2018, we see a pretty important drop because people had an alternative source of information that they could contrast and see that what they're being told by the man in the suit and the tie on the evening newscast may not be true. And in fact, if you just scroll a teeny bit underneath, it says right here, a lot of it is tied to the rise of social media, alternative news sites, and deepening polarization. Yes, absolutely. People have an alternative. People have Soberanía to watch if they are interested in having a different perspective. The public channels are being strengthened. There's investment in it. Of course, shout out to our friend, a friend of the show, Renata Turent, who's at the head of Canal 11 now, trying to do a turnaround there at that station. Right? Like that's what it's going to take. It's going to take investment, good programming, smart decisions, and of course, staying away from these kinds of scandals that have plagued the private media outlets and leads them to this loss of trust. And like you said, I'm with you 100%, right? I'm here for it. I'm here to watch them suffer. We don't owe them anything.
No, we don't. And, it's really funny that, the Mexican elite have lived in this tiny little bubble for so long. This tiny little bubble with no contact with the rest of the public or with the rest, or with reality, right? That they simply thought that the rules didn't apply to them at all. Not the rules, not the laws, not international law. They could get away with anything and everything because they could within the system that was structured in Mexico before. They could. So you saw this, ridiculous case back in 2007 where the PRI politician Roberto Madrazo, who had just lost the 2006 election and, distant third place, going over to a marathon in Berlin and cheating in the marathon. He actually cut part of the route and just didn't think he'd be caught. Right? This was just the beginning of the unraveling of this Mexican elite. And now you see, other people running into, the wall because of the same thing. This eternal idea of el que no tranza, no avanza. Right? If you're not scamming, you're not getting ahead. That's the way the Mexican elite rolled. So, we'll see if it's proven against Azcárraga. I find it very likely. Right? Give a bribe. Give a bribe to get the FIFA broadcast rights. Oh, get caught, right? Good. Or Salinas Pliego, right? Who screwed over his workers for years, made them come to work during the pandemic. Couldn't happen to a worse person, right? But then all of a sudden just tries to go and, screw over international investors who do have the money to be able to fight back and decide to just screw them over. Because they think they can get away with anything, so they always go one too far. And that's where they are now.
Thankfully, that era has ended. But on the topic of abuses of judicial systems, we want to switch to our next topic here, the Querétaro State Attorney General who's prosecuting a victim. And I want to put this story from Sin Embargo up on the screen. Citlali Hernández, she is the former Secretary General of Morena. She obviously left that post. Her term expired and has since been named the very first Secretary for Women under the very first female president of Mexico. And so I think this is one of those cases where it's very evident the difference it makes having strong, independent, intelligent, powerful women in the highest offices of this country. So what we've seen is this case, and I'll sum it up really quickly. We have a case of a minor, a 14-year-old girl, who it appears was sexually assaulted by somebody in her family. She ended up becoming pregnant as a result of that assault, and then suffered a spontaneous abortion. And so because that is a loaded term, I think it's worth unpacking. It's not that she went and sought an abortion, which is no longer criminalized in Mexico and is legal in many other states, though not all. But in this particular case, it was spontaneous, which is to say that for one reason or another, I'm not a doctor, and I'm certainly not her doctor, that pregnancy ended up becoming terminated. Now, it could have happened for natural reasons, especially in the first trimester. Anybody who's ever encountered a discussion around abortion and pregnancy is familiar with that. This often does happen in the first trimester. Anyway, all that to say, it was spontaneous abortion. But the Attorney General of the state of Querétaro, and we'll get to his name in a second because I think it's important to name and shame these people, decided not to prosecute the person who assaulted her, but the young girl, for allegedly having an abortion. And then, to add on to the injustice of this case, incredibly, also says that the alleged rapist has to pay $500,000 has to be paid $500,000 by the victim because of the impact of losing, what was going to be his child. Absolutely jaw-dropping misogyny. In some places in this country, there are still these attitudes where people put their own personal politics, which I believe is the case in this one, ahead of justice, and let their atrocious misogyny come through. Who is this individual? Like I said, we should name and shame him. Víctor de Jesús Hernández. He was appointed only in August. So he is months only in office and is now clearly making his views known by pursuing this case. So I started out by talking about Citlali Hernández. Citlali Hernández, like I said, incoming Secretary of Women, immediately said, we are not going to let this happen. We are going to intervene. We're going to accompany this case. We are going to intervene in order to stop this abuse of justice. And we can see here that President Sheinbaum, in today's morning press conference, informed that the case is being followed up on by the federal government, that they have been since the weekend, and that Citlali in particular, Ms. Hernández, said she will have several meetings to do with the case and will be providing an update on it. But I think this is the important thing here that I want to quote her on, say, never again in Mexico will there be a criminalization of any woman, much less a young woman who suffered a sexual assault. All the women of Mexico, we say, you are not alone. And I think the response in this case from the federal government, from the Secretary of Women, from the Secretariat, has been exemplary. It's unfortunate that this even has to be a topic of conversation, but this is how you respond, with strength, with firmness, saying this is a total miscarriage, this cannot stand, and we're going to take action with it. And before I pass it over to you, Kurt, for your share of your thoughts, I want to remind people that there was a very famous case of a young woman who was killed. Her body was found in Morelos, but it appears that the actual crime happened in Mexico City. Because her body was found in the state of Morelos, which is just south of the capital, very, very close, the Attorney General for that state ended up taking up the case in particular, and of course, did what happens so often in feminicides in this country, which is try to, wash the perpetrators of their responsibility, saying that, she died because of intoxication and she ended up asphyxiating on vomit, et cetera, et cetera. Basically trying to cast a version of events that absolve the perpetrators. And when this happened, Claudio Sheinbaum was governor of Mexico City. The Attorney General of Mexico City says, no, this is not okay. We're going to take this case on because this happened in Mexico City. And not only that, but actually tried to open a case to detain and prosecute the Attorney General for doing what he did, which is very clear to any observer, a miscarriage of justice, an attempt to not actually find out what happened to this young woman and hold those responsible accountable, but to actually get them off the hook. And it shows that there has been a consistent pattern with Claudio Sheinbaum of actually championing some of the really key things that the feminist movement in this country has been demanding, which is an end to impunity and action on feminicides, and an end to gender-based violence, action, like in this case of saying when there is an abuse, when yet again another sexist, misogynist attorney general decides to prosecute the victim instead of the perpetrator, that the state will intervene as it has, as it should.
Yeah, so a few notes just to complement your very complete exposition here. This 14-year-old is from an indigenous community. That's important to point out, right? The person who her was allegedly a family member, as all too often happens, who then threatened her not to speak, right? Because what this medieval Attorney General of Querétaro, what they're basically alleging is that she never proved that she can't prove that she was, and they didn't put in the denunciation at the time, right? Because she's 14, because she's from an indigenous community, right? Because it was probably her own family member who, threatened her with, even more violence if she did, or if anyone did report the case. And now they're using those conditions against this minor to claim that it was her fault for not reporting in the first place. This is what we call the re-victimization process, right? It's a re-victimization. So the sequence of events is that she was then 36 weeks pregnant and then suffered what appears to be a miscarriage, right? And instead of, caring for a victim of intrafamilial, sexual violence, she's now under house arrest, and has been for a while now, and is facing 3 years of some form of internment, right? If not jail because she's a minor, some form of internment that could, ruin her life more. And now they're saying, on top of that she has to pay out this $518 million to the aggressor. It's just so absurd. It's just so absurd. It's like we've talked about in this program about that 4-year-old who was sexually abused and couldn't say where it had happened. And so they let the guy off. And then you wonder why there's the judicial reform. Again, right? The first 2 pieces of today's program. Why are they putting so much effort into reforming the judicial system? Well, this is why, again. This is another reason. And it also, it goes to show that there's an element of the PAN, the Conservative Party, that is, as fundamentalist and medieval as the worst ultra-right Republicans, right? The worst. The worst medieval ultra-right Republicans, which would bring back the witch trials if they could, very happily. And now it's a question of what the federal government is going to be able to do, because this is a state-level case, right? The federal government does have the power to what's called attract state cases to the federal level under certain conditions. So it's going to be a question now of how the federal government can intervene to get some very basic justice for this re-victimized minor.
I think that point you make about where this is happening and who is actually carrying out is important to underline before we move on, which is, this Querétaro is one of the remaining places where the opposition governs, right? Where abortion has not yet been legalized through the local legislature. So Mexico's a federal republic that falls under the purview of the states, and the states have to go through the process. It's already been decriminalized because of the Supreme Court decision, but actually have to legalize it. That has not happened. In fact, the places where it happen to be where Morena has a governing majority, including in Jalisco, where the posing as left Movimiento Ciudadano governed, but it wasn't until there was a Morena representation in the Congress that the abortion actually get decriminalized. But anyway, the point is that this is an attitude from a very right-wing party that's governing in Querétaro, who, again, I have to emphasize this again, they're the ones who put him there. Víctor de Jesús Hernández, the attorney general who's prosecuting this case and has chosen to go this way, was put there in August by the PAN government in Querétaro. So, something to pay attention to. I think, again, one of the things that I think would really, really makes a difference when you have a woman as president is the leadership that she can provide on issues like this, and actually that we can advance. This isn't about scoring points. This isn't an FU to the PAN, although FU PAN for doing this. But this is about justice. This is about human rights, about reproductive rights, right? Even if this was a consensual decision for this girl, and if she wanted to make this decision over her body, she has that right, and that also needs to be protected. It's not the case in this one, but as we know, the attorney general here making a very, very almost parody of the situation. Okay, moving on to Claudio X González is a toxic Failson. All right, so this actually comes as a result of something Claudia Sheinbaum said herself here over the weekend, where she asked, using her pulpit there, speaking at the press conference, comes and gives our least favorite political actor in Mexico a little nickname, Junior Tóxico, or Toxic Failson. So here in Mexico, the mires, the juniors, these are terms we use for the children of the upper middle class or the upper class who go around Mexico acting like they are responsible for the wealth and privilege that they have, even though they inherited it.
They own the place.
And one of these guys in particular, one of these juniors, the best translation would be Failson, is Claudio X González. We've talked a lot about him. That name will not be unfamiliar to our viewers and listeners, but Claudio X González is the son of Claudio X González father, who was the former chair of the Kimberly-Clark, a major industry here in Mexico, who actually, and in her intervention, Claudia says herself, he actually built a business, became famous, but then you have his son, who decided to champion small L liberalism as his cause, as his raison d'etre here in Mexico, but obviously to the interests of the oligarchy, to the old political parties, the old neoliberal regime, which obviously benefited him greatly in a personal and business capacity, but also these are his friends, right? We've said it many times before. Claudio X González is the man behind the opposition. The opposition is in this weird forced marriage, the PRI, the PAN, and the PRD running together in the last election because of the pressure and the money that Claudio X González distributes to them. Well, López Obrador warned us. He said, compared to me, Claudia, I'm fresa compared to her. She is far, far more radical and is willing to say things that maybe even López Obrador wasn't. And I have to say, and it's not because I sympathize with Claudia or because I'm excited to see a woman in the presidency, but because she's right. This guy has never really done anything of note. All he's done is create all of these front organizations to give money and a home to opposition politicians in order to advance his own agenda via the opposition, but really is not an accomplished person. He's a Failson, and he's a toxic one. And I think she was right to launch this criticism of him, calling him what he is in effect, right? Somebody who is directly intervening in politics, but actually doesn't run for office himself, right? Even before López Obrador came to power, right? He was the one championing education reform, a regressive, anti-popular education reform. He's someone who has been directly intervening in politics. And if he didn't like being called this, then he should get out of the kitchen. If you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen, because this is politics, and you asked for it.
Yeah, and actually this was all provoked because he called her an authoritarian, right? So she was simply responding to that. So if you can't stand the kitchen, if you can't dish it out, how does it go? You can dish it out, but you can't take it, right? And I actually have a tweet on the issue, which attempts to put this into a degree of perspective here, right? Because, of course, he took umbrage at being called a toxic Failson, because how accurate it was, right? And says, I'm not a Failson. I'm a philanthropist. I'm a political activist. Oh, yes. I do important things. And so I put, Claudio X is as much a philanthropist as I am a rapper. And I'm going to save the public my attempts at rap to not have
I
to
was just going to say, please don't. Please don't. We
That's
believe you.
The next couch gag. It's coming up. Wait for it. As obvious as it is to say this, right? Spending your daddy's friend's money and the money from the U.S. government to advance your political interests, set up massive tax deductions, and send millions to Switzerland, to safe havens in Switzerland, is not philanthropy. just so you know that that's not what philanthropy is, if that's what you were thinking it was, right? And this is based on a series of investigations by the wonderful Mexican investigative magazine Contralinea and Nancy Juarez over there, which lays out how this, NGO, Mexicans Against Corruption and Impunity, made a series of very strange transfers of money over to a series of bank accounts in Switzerland. Why would they be doing that? Why? Aren't they against corruption and impunity here in Mexico? Right? Why are they sending money to Swiss accounts? Not philanthropy. There is philanthropy, and then there is not philanthropy. But, the bottom line on this before we move on is, Claudio should stay around as long as he wants, because he's the kiss of death for any political, organization or campaign. He was the, mastermind behind the throne of bringing the PAN and PRI together, and that's imploded both parties. He was the mastermind, behind the throne of the 2024 campaign, actually instrumental in choosing Xochitl Galvez as the candidate. Whole campaign imploded, right? They lost by 30 points. So you keep doing you, Claudio. You keep doing you.
Claudio. Always doing us a favor by making the opposition be worse than they already are. All right, moving on to our next topic. We have what I call here Red Scare fake news. So a couple of the buzz terms there. But I'll bring the story up. I'm actually not a huge fan of Animal Político or of El Sabueso. There is actually a denunciation of some unfair labor practices. But there isn't a lot of information out there about this. So this is the one I ended up choosing. And it's interesting. I'm going to give you a little anecdote. So I was hanging out over the weekend with my partner. We were just watching Reels on Instagram, if I'm not mistaken. And she gets this message, this forwarded message to her family's group chat. And I'm going to read it out to you. It basically says, the official governing party has begun with its census of healthcare in your home. It's a trap. Sorry, I thought of Admiral Hackbarth there. It's a trap. It's a trap. They'll ask questions if the home is yours, if you're renting, how many square meters it measures, how many bedrooms, how many people live there. They are preparing everything. So when they transition from private property to social property, they'll begin an unveiling stage 4 of the Sao Paulo Forum agreements. And like that, and exactly as they began in Cuba and Venezuela, these are communist programs. Don't answer their questions. Don't give them information. Don't let them even come into your house. Share so that others will know. This is a message that is being distributed on WhatsApp and other social media around one of the new social programs. We talked about this actually in the very first programs after Claudia took office. It's one of the kind of hallmark programs of this new government, basically building on what's been done and making sure that human right of health, which is in our Constitution, is actually complied with, that we're actually following through on it. There are a lot of families, particularly those in rural areas, who've never had access to a doctor. It's actually quite difficult to get doctors to certain parts of the country because the health workers simply don't want to go, right? It's far more attractive to work at a state-of-the-art hospital here in the capital than it is, a clinic freshly inaugurated in a population of 1,000 people, right? And so this is one of the ways, building on the experiences of other countries, yes, of actually bringing healthcare much closer. And it begins with the census. It's already begun. They're already knocking on doors, basically saying, what are your health needs? Who lives here? Have you ever been diagnosed? All this kind of stuff. Some of the things that they talk about them asking. But of course, it's not about finding out information in order to then seize your home, but it's actually about following through with this commitment, this human right that is enshrined in the Constitution. And why do I find it particularly worrisome? On a couple of points here. For example, they talk about the fact that this is something similar to what they saw in Venezuela. So a point on that. Healthcare in Venezuela, like in Mexico, was not accessible to the poor, to the people in the far-off regions. They developed a program called Barrio Adentro, which actually brought Cuban medicals, above all, because there were no Venezuelan healthcare professionals who wanted to work here, to go and live and work in the actual communities that they were meant to serve. And it was an extraordinary program that actually won international acclaim as a result of its efficiency in actually bringing healthcare to people who had never seen a doctor before. And to take this progressive human rights commitment and then to distort it, to make it seem like this horrible plot to take away your home, I mean, it speaks a lot to the mentality of the people who, one, are propagating in it, and two, who fall for it. So instead of being like, actually, this is the kind of program we should have had long ago. This didn't exist because of the neoliberal regime, and it's finally being followed through on. And instead of celebrating it, because I guarantee you some of the people who are receiving this message have people in their families or will be beneficiaries of this program. I mean, it is the height of insult that this is how they choose to attack the government. And then to go through these lies and to say that, oh, this is exactly how it all started in Venezuela, this kind of Red Scare propaganda around this social program. It's really frustrating that this is the direction that some people go to, but it also speaks to the lack of actual political arguments that some on the opposition and their sympathizers actually have. Because they can't actually say, no, we reject this government actually trying to fulfill its obligations under the Constitution. They have to go on these Red Scare tactics. It's absurd.
Yeah, it's exactly that, right? They can't come out and say, we're against people getting home-to-home care. So in all their meanness and all their miserableness, what they can try to do is to sabotage the program so that it fails. Right? That's it, right? And in the process, preventing people from getting necessary care. Because that's what this is all about. This is about getting health care to people who otherwise wouldn't have access to it, wouldn't go to a clinic, much less go to an urban hospital, right? And Sheinbaum was talking about this just today, or Monday, when this program comes out, about this kind of sabotage that's going around in the WhatsApp groups. And just saying, look, first of all, the census is optional. If you don't want to give your vital information to the person, then you don't give it, right? Nobody's forcing you to. Right? But the idea of the program is not just to go once, but to go regularly, at least once every 2 months. And if you need it, once every 2 weeks, right? To see, for example, if you're in an area that's in high risk for dengue, right? If you've lived in Mexico, you know how awful the dengue strain was this year. How awful the dengue strain this year. Laid people out for weeks. It was like bones cracking. It was just awful, the dengue strain this year. Those people can't get up if you're elderly and go to a clinic and go to the hospital. So you need health. You need home care for something like that. So if you're in an area with a high mosquito population, that's what you look out for, right? Or, the warning signs of high blood pressure and catching a heart attack before it happens. It could save some lives of somebody's great uncle, great aunt, grandparent. But then you have these nasty people trying to prevent something so fundamental to community from being carried out. Because they don't have the guts, they don't have the agallas to come out and say we're against home health care. Right? It's just so nasty and so sad, right? It's just like how they tried in Mexico City to make up the story that the municipal government there was trying to take away people's homes and change the private property laws, right? Just because they had to make a legal adjustment to property law to, harmonize with federal law, whatever else. Of course, they weren't taking away people's homes. But this is the kind of crap that they put out in WhatsApp groups.
Yeah. And you made an excellent point. I think you're right. I think the aim is to sabotage it. Who is the beneficiary of this program? Who are the people they're reaching out to? They're the people who are already benefiting from the universal pension. So I think there is a certain fear amongst political operators in this country who say, wow, not only are they going to get the pension, but now they're finally going to have health care. I mean, they're going to be even more firmly in support of the fourth transformation. This is bad. Mm-hmm. So let's make up news about it. And it's just so bad. It's so bad because, like I said, this has a personal element in that I first came upon it as a result of it coming through a family group of my partners, right? Like the person who sent it is an intelligent person who has the criteria to know, yet they fall for this kind of stuff, right? And one final note on that, can't forget the impact that this can ultimately have. There was a study that was done about the role of WhatsApp in Bolsonaro's victory in Brazil. Mm-hmm. It played what is arguably an indispensable role in getting him elected, right? With all of this kind of chains of information coming out through social media. They're very hard to reply because they're private, right? They're encrypted chats that get this information. You don't know where it's going. You don't know who's received it. How do you answer something like that? And it ended up being pretty consequential in that election that saw a far-right actor in Brazil get elected. Fortunately, here in Mexico, they learned the experience of Brazil and those early PT governments and have a much better communication strategy. I feel like these are less effective, but again, more evidence in terms of what direction they're headed. And all to stop a social program. Incredible. Speaking of social programs, we're going to move on to good news from Mexico. And Kurt, I'll let you run with this one. I'll read the headline out here. The day workers and the sweatshop workers, women, they are going to be the priority for the new system of care, says President Sheinbaum. So what's this all about? What is the system of care? What is this news actually telling us about the priorities of the Sheinbaum government?
Yeah, so one of the priorities of this new government, right, and something I think is really going to differentiate the segundo piso from the primer piso, is this focus on a national care system, the Sistema Nacional de Cuidados. And in very much in Sheinbaumian style, it's carried out from kind of a comprehensive approach, right? We talked last week about this comprehensive approach to, the obesity and diabetes problems through attacking, junk food in schools and making drinkable water available and promoting healthy food, kind of a global approach, an integral approach. So the integral approach to care takes a number of different forms. One of them is this, home-to-home healthcare that we just talked about, that they're trying to sabotage, right? Another one is reducing the pension age from 65 down to 60 for women who had to, shoulder the burden of so much of the care, right, historically in Mexico and elsewhere. Another part is the disability pension, which I think went up to 30, and now they're bringing it up to 64 so that people with disabilities will have lifetime coverage leading into getting in the pension at 65, right? But another very important one has to do with the most at-risk populations in Mexico, the most at-risk populations. Talk about, por el bien de todo primero los pobres. And two of these very high-risk populations that they've identified, first of all, are maquiladora workers at the border and that belt of assembly plants along the border, with the focus on Ciudad Juárez, right? As President Sheinbaum said yesterday in her morning press conference, Mexico has a historical debt with these maquiladora workers, mainly women, who work obscene hours, historically for very low pay, right? This is the Mexico's maquiladora model, neoliberal maquiladora model from the 90s. Right, this was supposed to be going to bring Mexico into the first world through, assembly plants with, exploitative work hours, exploitative work conditions, and very dangerous because there's been an epidemic of murders of the women of Juárez dating back to the beginning of the maquiladora era. No, not coincidentally. I remember one of the articles that first got me interested in Mexico was an article in Harper's in 1996 talking about the women of Juárez, before I knew hardly anything about Mexico. Mm-hmm. So part of that justice, of course, has to be improving living conditions, improving wages, and promoting unionizing and all that. But what they're doing with the maquiladora workers is setting up a care system for their children, which they've, never had, right? Quality daycare for the maquiladora workers and also for what are called the jornaleros, which are day laborers, right? Day laborers, which are often migrant families, which migrate either alone or as a family unit from different parts of the country, usually the south towards the north or center north, to work in the countryside, right? Think Steinbeck. Think the Steinbeck novels of the 30s and all of his, eloquent novels about the United States' day laborers in the time of the Depression, the time of the Dust Bowl, and the migrations of the Okies to California, right? And all the penury through which the day laborers had to work and suffer of mice and men, living in those barracks and these, and these farms and then moving on, right? The idea that they move on, right? They work here, they work a season and onwards. So of course you're subject to organized crime, you're subject to sex traffickers, you're subject to the standard exploitation of the country, of the, farm owners and such. So it's a very, for 2 or 3 or 4 reasons, a lot of them are indigenous also, it's a very, very precarious existence. So the focus is to get them in registered in healthcare in the EAMS system, and also to provide, daycare to them as well. Right? So this is very, very important. The maquiladora population and the jornalero population, very, very, very important that the programs are focused on them. And it's funny that, one of the worst scandals that happened in the Calderon government was the fire at the ABC daycare, right, which burned to death. I don't remember how many children, right? I think those families were just awarded a pension from AMLO, right? One of his final acts. That was because they'd created this system of outsourced daycare to private, outfits, which would then place these daycares in, unfit settings, dangerous settings, like this ABC setup, which was in a very flammable place, and set fire and burn these kids to death. So this is a very important issue for Mexicans, that the national care system include daycare especially for, the most underprivileged populations, but also in safe circumstances, José Luis, and that's an integral part of this kind of global care system that's being set up.
Yeah, the part that jumps out to me is that the quote here, right, is the idea is attending to one of the ones that there is what we can call a historic debt to, right? Populations that are been very marginalized, very vulnerable, they should receive priority attention. However, with an eye towards universality, right? Like we're going to start with this segment of the population, but we're going to keep working towards more attention towards these populations, but also universal application, right? I think, like you said, I think it speaks to the priorities of what is now being called the second floor of the transformation. And I think is important to pay attention to in terms of, what it reflects about the government's priorities. And I think it's important, signal to these populations that they're going to be the ones that get the attention first. No, like it's not just a slogan, right? For the good of all, the poor come first. Okay.
So I just looked it up. Very quickly. 49 children who died in that fire at Hermosillo, Sonora in 2009.
Terrible. Yeah. Okay, on our final topic, as always, can't miss the losers and haters. And we're going to be talking about Ryan Berg. We've talked about Ryan before. Ryan is a think tank guy. He's somebody who grew up in the academic world, got his PhD, and then decided he's going to use his education to advance the interests of U.S. imperialism. That's the way to put it. These think tanks are essentially extensions of U.S. foreign policy in many cases. This guy in particular, he's director of the CSIS Americas, as you can see there, the future of national security in the region. Whenever you hear the term national security, think U.S. imperialism.
That's the buzzword right there. Yep.
Council of Foreign Relations, et cetera, et cetera. So Ryan Berg here shares the other day this post, which is actually about López Obrador, former president. They and his co-authors did a report on the executive aggrandizement. You always count on these academics to invent terms for basically the same idea. What they're talking about is a so-called concentration of power. That is an old political science term. You don't need to talk about executive aggrandizement, but anyway. We found, he
equal
says,
aggrandizement in their case, right?
we found he presided over democratic backsliding on 14 of 16 measures. In just a few weeks, Claudio Sheinbaum has checked nearly all of the boxes.
Well,
Now,
she's been busy. She's been busy,
so.
hasn't she? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It took him 6 years to check off 14 of 16. Claudia's got most of all of them now. But here's the thing. All right, so this report was actually published late in López Obrador's term, right? One, to kind of try to drive the narrative around the legacy of his administration, but two, to do this, to do what you're seeing on the screen, to say, look, Claudia's his handpicked successor, and she's exactly the same as him. In just a few weeks, she has checked nearly all of the boxes. Now, we could go line by line about these boxes, right, where they claim that these things are happening. Budget manipulation related to electoral oversight. Not true. It's part of the generalized Republican austerity. Restriction of voter access. Totally untrue. In fact, we've actually seen an expansion. Hampering of electoral procedures. Again, it wasn't López Obrador who intervened, but it was actually the Electoral Authority who kicked out Morena's candidates and started this war. Anyway, we go line by line, but suffice it that this is the part I really wanted to conclude to. So he shares this graph as if it's, this is the be-all and end-all. This is the truth, the sacred truth, Kurt. What's the source of this? Well,
I think
tiny letters.
He would have to have some very important, scholarly sources to back this up. I mean, that has to be true, right? It looks very authoritative. It looks very credible. I'm even, teetering here.
Nope. It's the author's analysis. You know what that is? It's the meme come to life. I made it up. Basically, he's like, this is my analysis, and now I'm presenting you as if it is political science and truth, and here you are, and take it. And not only that, but it's also Claudio Sheinbaum, not just López Obrador.
Translation into Spanish, mis huevos. Yeah, mis huevos. Yeah.
And here's the thing, right? Like, guys like Ryan are desperate to be taken seriously. Right? They so badly want people to be like, oh wow, I'm gonna put. He's got PhD in his handle. He must know what he's talking about. He must be serious. This is not serious analysis. You can't take it seriously. It's a political analysis driven by a political agenda, which is tied to the U.S. national security apparatus. It's an whole ecosystem that actually operates around this to drive forward these narratives that advance the interests of the U.S. Department of State, of the Pentagon, of the White House. These are not independent thinkers. These are people with a political agenda, and they will try to present information as if it's objective, but the source, author's analysis. I mean,
14 points of executive aggrandizement made up by me, myself, and I.
Or maybe his co-authors who think exactly the same, who went to the same schools, who had the same thesis supervisors, right? Who have the same friends in the Beltway, et cetera, et cetera. This is the ludicrousness of coverage of Mexico. Anyway, Ryan, I know you really, really want to be taken seriously, but every time you post, you lose a little bit of credibility with not just people like me, but the rest of the world. And just as one final example of the absurdity of how things are, because you obviously see executive aggrandizement, democratic backsliding. I'm sure people like this are the kinds that would point to this episode that happened over this weekend. So here in Mexico, it was all over social media. Oh, the repressive Sheinbaum government kettled two poor protesters who were outside of this major petty bourgeois gathering around car races here in Mexico City. What repressive, awful they are. And of course, it was one picture that just made the rounds everywhere. And it had not a drop of truth to it. The video that we see on the screen is what actually happened. There was a clustering of security forces, Mexico City police, right? Preventative police, right? Who had gathered at this event, which are always heavily policed. This is not new. This is not, all of a sudden because Morena won, there's more heavily armored police, as has always been the case in Mexico City. In fact, there was a bunch of fights inside of the stadium. So that's Part of the reason why there's often a heavy police presence at these things. And that's where they were gathering. And in the image, kind of looked like they were being kettled and that this was a repression. But look, it lasts not even a minute. Not even a minute. And it was just the cops kind of adjusting to their deployment in the area. And in fact, even in the video, you can see some people try to squeeze by and they don't have anyone around. But that's just it. This is an example of the kinds of things that they say, look, so authoritarian, so repressive, when the truth is quite different.
14 points of executive aggrandizement, José Luis.
14 of 16.
14 of 16, yeah. So they got to get the other two to get the kind of fill up all the check boxes.
That's right. That should be the aim. Claudia, get 16 of 16.
Yes.
All of it. Make Ryan Berg
totally aggrandized. Yeah.
All right. Well, that brings us to an end of another program here on what was it? It's not sovereignty.
Souveraineté. Souveraineté. No?
No.
No.
You'll get it. You'll get it.
All right. That's just because the hour is up here. I'm going to go straight to the chase. We'll see you next time on another episode of Soberanía.